Now we will talk about how this nerve originates within the brain stem. That means we're discussing here is intraneural course of glossopharyngeal nerve. So here you can see that there are actually 5 nerve fibers which are arising from the 5 different nuclei. The nuclei of visceral afferent is a combined nucleus. Special visceral and general visceral afferent is a combined nucleus. Now look here, first of all, you have to identify that what section you are seeing. This section you are seeing is the uppermost portion of the medulla. And how to get to know that it's medulla? Anteriorly, you will have these 2 bulgings. The bulgings are the pyramids. And then a little laterally, anterolaterally, you find another bulge. And these bulges are because of this corrugated purse type nucleus, the inferior olivary nucleus. Because of that, there are bulgings anterolaterally on the surface of medulla, and that's called olives. In the upper portion of the medulla, you find anterolateral bulges. These are called olives, and bulging is because of inferior olivary nucleus. Then posterolaterally, again, it has bulges there, and those bulgings are because of the inferior cerebellar peduncles, right? So anterior to lateral, you find these 3 bulges: pyramidal bulgings, olivary bulgings, then the bulging because of the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Then look here in the dorsal aspect, one more thing that will help you identify upper section, because the roof is not closed. The roof is not closed. This actually is the 4th ventricle, and the roof here will be formed by cerebellum. So because the upper portion of the medulla is open dorsally, and partly, these are inferior medullary velum. These partial projections, these are inferior medullary velum. And such type of open portion of the 4th ventricle you will also find in the lower pons. Remember? So the 4th ventricle you will find is open behind in case of lower pons and in case of upper medulla. Then if you go down in the lower section of the medulla, this thing will be closed by the inferior medullary velum. Okay, and one more thing, in the entire brain and even in the cerebrum, I told you there is a lot of meshwork of fibers, including the nuclei, sparse scattered nuclei, and that is called a reticular formation. Reticular formation is a very complex type of thing, not easily understood, and it's scattered in the brain stem. So there are tracts also, remember, medial reticulospinal, lateral reticulospinal tracts we discussed in the extrapyramidal tracts. So this portion here you find is the reticular formation, right? This is all a reticular formation. Embedded within this reticular formation, you will find these nuclei. So let's talk about all of them one by one. Here you find is the nucleus ambiguous. So nucleus ambiguous is an efferent functional column, and it's for the muscles derived from the brachial arches, 3rd, 4th, 6th arches. So from here, it will be the special visceral efferent fibers will emerge out, and because I believe you can slightly appreciate the colors of these nerve fibers, dark green colored nerve fiber, they have tried to show it. This is a lower motor neuron emerging from the nucleus, passing through the ipsilateral nerve. And because it's a lower motor neuron, you will find the cell bodies will be located here within the nucleus. Got it? Okay. The other efferent functional column will be inferior salivatory nucleus, and this will be general visceral efferent functional column, inferior salivatory nucleus. It is just above the dorsal nucleus of vagus. The same functional component in this vertical or in the longitudinal axis of this inferior salivatory nucleus. Above you will find a superior salivatory nucleus, and below to that you will find this dorsal nucleus of vagus. Okay, so from here again, these fibers which are emerging out, actually these are the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers, neurons. So their cytons will be lying here, and these fibers will run along the entire course and will reach extracranially and will relay there in the otic ganglion. From the otic ganglion, the postganglionic parasympathetic fibers will reach the parotid gland via the auriculotemporal nerve. So that means here also you don't find a cyton. Can you see there are cytons here in the 3 nerves, and those all the 3 will be afferents. Remember, there were 5 functional components. 2 were efferent and 3 were afferents. So these cytons you are seeing here are in the neurons of afferent functional components. This one, blue one, is the general visceral efferent parasympathetic outflow, and this one is special visceral efferent for the stylopharyngeus, muscles of the 3rd pharyngeal arch. Then let me tell you, while this nerve emerges here outside, it actually has 2 ganglions. You have a superior ganglion and an inferior ganglion. We'll talk about it. Let's see the fibers first. Then among the afferents, remember, first of all, the visceral fibers, sensations from the visceral area, that is posterior one third of the tongue, tonsils, soft palate, pharynx. So from this area, the general visceral afferents for the general sensations, they will be brought in here. Remember, can you see the red color fibers? They're reaching here in the nucleus of tractus solitarius in the lower portion. Got it? And because they're first order sensory neurons, they will be pseudo unipolar neurons. Remember the spinal nerves, the typical spinal nerve I taught you in detail. So these are the first order pseudo unipolar neurons. The cytons will lie outside the CNS, and that collection of cytons is called a ganglion. And this ganglion will be homologous to the DRG of the spinal nerves, dorsal root ganglion. It's a sensory ganglion, and this also will be homologous to trigeminal ganglion, the Gasserian ganglion. It will be homologous, the same as geniculate ganglion of the facial nerve, that also is a sensory ganglion. So remember, the inferior as well as the superior ganglion of the glossopharyngeal nerve is a sensory nucleus, and it is same with the rest of the afferent functioning columns. Okay, so you're seeing is cytons here. Then the gustatory sensations from the posterior one third of the tongue, and including the sensations from circumvallate papillae, they will be brought in here through special visceral afferent nerve fibers carrying sensations of taste, and they will be relaying here in the upper portion of nucleus of tractus solitarius. Again, because these are the first order sensory neurons, they will have their cytons located here in the inferior ganglion of glossopharyngeal. Now, the third one is the general somatic afferent, which brings in sensations of touch, pain, pressure, vibration from the middle ear and the communicated areas. So those sensations will be brought in here through these fibers coming from exteroceptive receptors for touch, pain, pressure, vibration sensations, and they will relay here in the chief sensory nucleus, and in case of pain, temperature, in the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Got it? And because they are first order sensory neurons, they will be pseudo unipolar neurons. The cytons will be collected outside the CNS. So together, this collection of cytons form the inferior ganglion of glossopharyngeal nerve. Now let me ask you, there are some sensory fibers which do not have their cytons outside the CNS. First order sensory neurons having the cytons within the CNS is only in case of one tract, and that is the sense of proprioceptive sensations from the head and neck region. Okay, and those are the proprioceptive sensations brought in from the muscles of the head and neck area, because they are the unipolar neurons. So those neurons carrying proprioceptive sensations from stylopharyngeus muscle, their cytons you will not find here in these ganglion of the glossopharyngeal. Rather, they will straight away reach to the mesencephalic nucleus of trigeminal nerve, and the cytons will be within that nucleus, mesencephalic nucleus, right? So those are the first order neurons. So actually, you can compare that mesencephalic nucleus also sensory ganglion, same as the other sensory ganglions. The only thing is that it is located within the CNS. Got it? Now there will be some confusion because different authors have sometimes written differently, and let me tell you that these are actually two ganglion within this, jugular foramen. Because most of the afferents, they have the cytons here in the inferior ganglions. The main ganglion is the inferior ganglion of glossopharyngeal, and the superior ganglion is just a detached portion from this inferior ganglion. The main ganglion is the inferior ganglion of the glossopharyngeal nerve. Sometimes these first order neurons from the middle ear, they might have the cytons in the superior ganglion of the glossopharyngeal nerve. One more thing before I move to another slide, let me tell you, when you were seeing on the ventral aspect of the brainstem, there are sulcus, right? Like you have sulcus on the cerebral hemispheres, you even have sulcus on the brainstem, and you even have sulcus on the spinal cord. So in the spinal cord, there was this anterolateral sulcus in the spinal cord, and to that anterolateral sulcus, there were efferent nerve rootlets arising from the anterior horn of the spinal cord, right? So that means from the anterolateral sulcus, the rootlets which emerge out, they are actually efferent nerve fibers, autonomic fibers or the somatic fibers from the spinal cord. So here, this area here you're seeing is pyramid and olive. So in between pyramid and olive, there will be anterolateral sulcus extending down. In anterolateral sulcus will be more prominent in the middle and lower portion of the medulla, and from there, this 12th cranial nerve will arise, because that is pure motor nerve for the muscles of the tongue. Then again, compare with the spinal cord, there was this posterolateral sulcus in the spinal cord, from where the afferent rootlets were reaching in to the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. So posterolateral sulcus is actually the sulcus for attachment of sensory nerve fibers, sensory nerve rootlets. So remember, now this sulcus here between the olives and the inferior cerebellar peduncle, that side, if you continue to trace it down, then you will find that the sulcus which is posterolaterally located, and from this sulcus you will find the three nerves emerging, and those are 9th, 10th, and 11th cranial nerves from the medulla. So if you keep comparing with the spinal cord, that's why we're teaching neuroanatomy from down to above, caudal to rostral. So this will emerge here from the posterolateral sulcus of the brainstem above the vagus. Now you're seeing intracranial course. We have done with the intraneural course. Now the nerve emerges on the ventral aspect of the brainstem. You can see here, this is the medulla. This is the median sulcus of fissure actually, which lodges the anterior spinal artery. Here in this case, there will be vertebral artery from both the side, which will join to form the basilar artery. Anyway, so then you have these pyramids, and then you have, this is the anterolateral sulcus. You can see from the anterolateral sulcus, it is this hypoglossal nerve that emerges the motor root. M for motor, M for medial. I have been repeatedly telling you this. Then behind this olives, you have this posterolateral sulcus, and from that posterolateral sulcus, you will find 9th, 10th, and 11th cranial nerves arising. Cranial portion of accessory. They'll be arising from the posterolateral sulcus. Then glossopharyngeal. I told you there were 5 functional components from where these nerves were emerging. So at the surface of the brainstem, they will emerge via 3 to 4 filaments. Here, it is not an intact nerve that is emerging. Rather, it is emerging by 3 to 4 rootlets. So these rootlets will soon, all of them, 3 or 4 rootlets will soon join to form a single nerve, and that's glossopharyngeal nerve. So here you've seen is this origin just behind the olives from the posterolateral sulcus above the vagus, and this portion of the nerve will be bathing in the subarachnoid space. So it will be bathing here in the subarachnoid space. Then it will ascend. Remember where it is emerging? It in the posterior cranial fossa, right? The brainstem rests over the clivus. So it is emerging in the posterior cranial fossa, and it will ascend upwards, forwards, and laterally to move towards the jugular foramen. So throughout in its course, it stays within the posterior cranial fossa. Okay. Then this foramen is, in fact, a big foramen. It's divided into 3 parts. Here you find is jugular notch for the inferior ganglion of the glossopharyngeal nerve. Here is a notch, and through this foramen there will be 3 cranial nerves that will emerge out. You know that 9th, 10th, and 11th nerves will emerge out through the middle portion of this jugular foramen. And remember that it's actually here the medulla is located, pons is located here, midbrain is located here, right? It's the upper half of the midbrain which emerges out of the anterior notch of the tentorium cerebelli. So the course of glossopharyngeal will be from here reaching up to this portion. So while it traverses from this area over the clivus laterally to reach the jugular foramen, it actually grooves. So this glossopharyngeal nerve will groove this jugular tubercle to reach the jugular foramen. And one more thing is this inferior petrosal, it actually separates. There were 3 nerves in this jugular foramen, 9th, 10th, and 11th. So this 9th nerve is separated from the 10th and 11th nerve because of inferior petrosal sinus. Remember that. Then there is a canaliculus called tympanic canaliculus. Tympanic canaliculus, you will find here, actually there's a small thinned out crest between, you're seeing from the inferior view, right? So you're finding is the carotid canal, and this is the jugular fossa. So in between the jugular fossa and the carotid canal, there is a thin plate of bone, and onto that thin plate of bone, you will find there is this canal, and that's called tympanic canaliculus. Through this tympanic canaliculus, it is the tympanic branch of glossopharyngeal nerve. So it's the first branch of glossopharyngeal, right? And that arises from the inferior ganglion of the glossopharyngeal nerve. So tympanic branch of glossopharyngeal ascends, and it passes through the tympanic canaliculus, and from here it will reach into the middle ear cavity. And within the middle ear cavity, it will form a plexus over the promontory, and that's called tympanic plexus. And in this middle ear cavity, there's all mucosa lining the middle ear cavity, and that will be communicating anteriorly to the auditory tube, and posteriorly it will be communicating to the adductus, to the mastoid antrum, and the ear cells. So all of this surface of the middle ear will be innervated by this nerve, tympanic branch of glossopharyngeal nerve. And don't forget that this nerve is also carrying preganglionic parasympathetic fibers, which will have nothing to do here, rather they will extend as lesser petrosal nerve, and they'll emerge out of this petrous temporal bone in the form of hiatus for the lesser petrosal nerve on the anterior surface, and will pass out through foramen ovale. And remember that this nerve also has a different name, that the tympanic branch of glossopharyngeal nerve is called Jacobson's nerve. Can you tell me that this is a jugular foramen of which side, right side or left side? When you are seeing it from a superior view, like, the interior of the cranium from above, so this jugular foramen will be of right side or left side? This will be of the left side, right? There's a smooth margin, because the smooth margin is infromedially because of the occipital bone. This is anterolaterally because of the petrous temporal bone, right? So this is the jugular foramen. Can you see it has an anterior portion, a bigger posterior portion? This is called jugular fossa here, and the middle portion. So in the middle portion, there are 3 nerves that pass out, and these are the 9th, 10th, and 11th cranial nerves. And one more thing, can you see here that glossopharyngeal will be enclosed separately in a separate dural sheath, while 11th and 12th will be enclosed together in a common dural sheath. Okay. Then there's this notching here. I told you that's the glossopharyngeal notch here on the petrous side of this foramen, and this lodges the inferior ganglion of the glossopharyngeal. Now, remember the brainstem was here, foramen magnum was here. So glossopharyngeal was having this course running up forward laterally. So when it runs forward laterally, this glossopharyngeal, now I told you it passes through the jugular tubercle of the occipital bone, and grooving this tubercle, you will have an impression on this jugular tubercle, and that will be because of the glossopharyngeal nerve. Then other structures is like, this is inferior petrosal sinus, right, communicating the cavernous sinus here. This sinus, it drains into the internal jugular vein. So this inferior petrosal sinus, it passes like this, and it runs between the glossopharyngeal and the 2 nerves, 10th and 11th. So inferior petrosal sinus is sinus which separates these, and that's why you can say you have separate dural sheath for glossopharyngeal, because of the inferior petrosal sinus. It runs like this, passing between 9th and 10th nerve, and drains down into the internal jugular vein. Now in its extracranial course, when this emerges out of the jugular foramen, this nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve, look here, there will be like 3 nerves emerging out, and you have this internal jugular here, and you have this internal carotid. Now think about carotid sheath. A lot of question comes upon carotid sheath and its content. So carotid sheath, the highest limit will reach up, remember, to the base of the petrous, because it will have to enclose the carotid canal as well as the jugular foramen, because this will ascend up through the carotid canal. This reaches to the jugular foramen. So when it will be like covered here, this all will be covered by the carotid sheath. So remember that, everybody knows, like within the carotid sheath, what are the contents you have: internal carotid, common carotid on the medial side, internal jugular vein on the lateral side, and vagus in between, right? This everybody knows. Now, what are the contents in the upper portion? There is 9th, 10th, and 11th cranial nerves, which are also the content of carotid sheath, right? So 9th nerve becomes a content of carotid sheath. Now this glossopharyngeal nerve, it will descend down and will pass medial to the styloid process, and will run in between internal and external carotid arteries along with the pharyngeal branch of vagus. These are 2 nerves which pass between internal carotid and external carotid. So now you've seen is this glossopharyngeal nerve passing between the 2 arteries, internal and external carotid arteries. Now after that, it will reach down, and while it's running here, remember, it will give its carotid branches. They will descend down to supply the carotid body and carotid sinus. While passing out here, there is the styloid process, and to this there will be a muscle attached, that is stylopharyngeus. So this glossopharyngeal nerve, in its pharyngeal portion, it will descend down and will wind laterally to stylopharyngeus. Look here, this is the midline, and this is the pharyngeal portion of the glossopharyngeal nerve. This is the styloid process. This muscle here is stylopharyngeus, passing between superior and middle constrictor. There were the 3 constrictors of pharynx: superior, middle, and inferior constrictor, right? So the glossopharyngeal nerve winds laterally along this stylopharyngeus muscle, supplying this muscle, and then over to this middle constrictor, it forms the pharyngeal plexus. And this plexus is formed not only by glossopharyngeal, but vagus as well as sympathetic fibers that together form a pharyngeal plexus here. That's the pharyngeal course. Then down here, it will descend down. Now look here, this is the submandibular region. Here you find this muscle is hyoglossus. Glossopharyngeal, you can see here, it is passing medially to the stylohyoid ligament, and it reaches the tongue, passing deep to the hyoglossus muscle. So remember, glossopharyngeal nerve is related medial to the hyoglossus muscle to supply the posterior one-third of the tongue, and the tonsillars, arches, tonsils. And remember, to the palate also, it doesn't supply alone. It actually joins the lesser palatine nerves. Together, it supplies the mucosa. It actually is supplying, it's a sensory supply here in this region. So it supplies the mucosa of this region.